The Growing Crisis on the Border. A presentation by Paul Brackey, author, publisher. American Leadership Books. Author of 9 books on social, political, and criminal justice issues. Liberals and conservatives had different perceptions when it began. Liberals tended to downplay the reality of the crisis. Conservatives expressed growing concern this was a growing crisis that would threaten the nation. Here's how these different views developed. When the first caravans began marching to the U.S., liberals derided concerns about this first influx of migrants. The liberals and media focused on the distance from the United States. However, after truck drivers picked up the first migrants to help them get to the border and many other caravans followed, the true nature of the crisis was revealed. It was now understood by the liberals, the media, and others that this was both a humanitarian and national security problem. The liberals and media play up the humanitarian aspect of the migrants to present them as victims. While it may be true that most are victims, the huge number of migrants has put strains on both Mexico and the U.S. personnel on the border. The big problem is there is no way to integrate the huge numbers of migrants into society. Any integration is especially difficult because most migrants don't speak English, and they are largely impoverished and uneducated. Thus, the migrants are a drain on the resources of society. The numbers are huge and growing, especially as most migrants remain in detention camps on the border. In 1 month alone, in March 2019, U.S. authorities processed over 103,000 migrants, the highest number of migrants in 1 month in over a decade. By May, the number of migrants already increased to over 130,000. It is likely this number will increase as more and more migrants head to the U.S. border. In response to the overwhelming numbers, both Mexico and the U.S. have had to crack down. The crackdown in Mexico has been increasing the numbers of illegal entrants who have attempted to cross into the U.S. where border security is lax. One way the migrants are getting in due to Mexico's crackdown is getting help from a coyote to take them, such as across a river into Texas. The trip into Texas takes less than 15 minutes in some spots. This 277-mile stretch along the Rio Grande River is one of the busiest sections of illegal crossings. There are few border agents patrolling the area. The migrants typically pay between $3,000 to $9,000 a person. How can impoverished migrants afford the $3,000 to $9,000 per person cost? Some borrow from family members and relatives, with a promise to pay them back after they find work in the U.S. Presumably the drug cartels are helping many of them get across, perhaps so they will act as drug couriers for them now or in the future. As the number of migrants has grown, they are forced into even greater dangers. Many have ended up wandering in the woods, swamps and rail lines. Many have suffered from the ravages of the weather and danger of attacks by criminals. Mexico has contributed to the dangers facing migrants in many ways. Mexico stopped handing out humanitarian visas at the border. Mexico's work visas only allow migrants to work in the poor southern states offering low pay. Mexican immigration officials not only took days or weeks to process visas, but they launched raids that broke up some of the caravans. Still other dangerous actions of the Mexican government are these. The government warned truckers that they could face fines, so they no longer stopped to offer rides. The government has ignored the migrants' complaints of criminal attacks on them. In one case, a migrant walked with his wife and a couple of dozen Hondurans and was attacked by a gang. A gangster held a knife to his throat while the gangster's gang raped his wife. When he filed a criminal complaint with the authorities who would normally give them an automatic visa as crime victims, the immigration authorities tore up the documents during a raid. Mexico has begun actively deporting most migrants to their home countries. Despite the dangers, the migrants keep coming in greater numbers and seek out illegal ways into the U.S. For a time an outcry about the zero-tolerance policy that separated more than 2,700 children from their parents did reduce the flow of migrants. Then, the practice of not separating children from their parents at the border crossing led to even more migrants entering the U.S. illegally. While the migrants have been suffering from their long travels and living in tent cities, this migration has placed major strains on border agents. Border agents have been overwhelmed in trying to cope with these large numbers. To deal with this crisis, the Pentagon is preparing to loosen restrictions which prevent troops from interacting with migrants entering the U.S. By loosening these rules, troops can assist with the care and feeding of migrants after they arrive. This change in military policy is a response to a request from the Department of Homeland Security for additional military assistance. About 300 troops will be assigned to support roles, such as driving buses with migrants and providing them with meals. Defense Department lawyers will be reassigned to help process the migrants at deportation hearings in the immigration courts. These new military forces will supplement the troops at the border, about 2,900 active duty troops and 2,000 National Guard troops. The cost will be several $100 million through 2019. Current U.S. laws are not designed to cope with this huge influx of migrants, since they make applying for asylum too easy for migrants. Once migrants reach U.S. soil, they are legally allowed to apply for asylum after they are taken to a Border Patrol station to be processed and given a court date. In the past, applicants would be allowed to go into the U.S. while waiting for their court hearing, which could be 2 to 5 years out. Then, a great number of them would not return for their court date, adding to the over 11 million illegal immigrants in the U.S. A popular argument of liberals is that the migrants shouldn't be kept from filing for asylum, since the vast majority aren't criminals. Less than 1% of the migrants who cross the border have had any criminal activity, according to Department of Homeland Security (DHS) statistics. However, the vast number of migrants still overwhelms the system, with poor migrants who would need help from social services and welfare handouts. But most importantly, it doesn't matter if the migrants aren't criminals or really have true claims of persecution or fear. We just can't cope with the huge numbers trying to get into the U.S. Previous books and chapters on immigration in the U.S. Fractured America. Chapters in Crime in America. Uncertain Justice. For more information, American Leadership Books. Little Rock, Arkansas. www.americanleadershipbooks.com. Info@americanleadershipbooks.com